Welcome to the Recovering Perfectionist Podcast, where I empower you to develop sustainable habits, challenge society, and take messy action. I'm Christine, life balance coach and world champion ballroom dancer, and I believe that everyone has the power to create their very own life by design. The Recovering Perfectionist Podcast was created with a mission to encourage a life of abundance by finding peace and acceptance in our own imperfections and developing healthy self-love through sustainable habits and manifestation. It's time to align with the universe for the full human experience and redefine what it really means to be successful.
It's too good, the secret is out and wow.
Welcome back to the Recovering Perfectionist Podcast. I am so excited for our guest today because we are going to be discussing something that I really haven't dug deep into yet. This is Justine Carino, and she is a licensed mental health counselor. And we're going to be discussing today how perfectionism and anxiety really work in the same field here, and how your anxiety is really affected by your perfectionism. Justine, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
Yeah, Justine and Christine, crushing
we
it.
Rhyme.
I love it. Thank you so much. I found Justine on Instagram through another guest. You were with Nicole Baker, life coach Baker.
Yeah, Nicole's awesome.
Yeah, she's fabulous. So she came on and we discussed the 3 types of perfectionists.
Yes.
So if you guys haven't heard that episode, I'll link it below. That was a great episode. And I saw you on her podcast and started, discovering what it is that you do and kind of the niche that you have of perfectionism, which is anxiety.
Yes. I'm obsessed with anxiety. I'm just so fascinated by it because it's such a visceral biological response. Every single human has been designed to have. Everyone knows what it feels like to be anxious. And then that you can take it to the next level where that anxiety is so pervasive and chronic that it becomes an anxiety disorder. So I specialize in treating anxiety disorders, but I also work with people that have the baseline levels of anxiety, generalized anxiety. And through working with this population, there were themes that kept popping out through my therapy sessions. And some of the biggest ones were perfectionism, people pleasing, overachieving. And I'm like, whoa, how is it that everyone I'm seeing week to week has these underlying themes to them? There must be some kind of big correlation between anxiety and perfectionism. And there is, they go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Yeah, they absolutely do. I am curious what got you into this field. Is this something you've always wanted to do? Obviously went to school to be licensed to do this. And also how does your anxiety play a part in what you do and how you help others?
Totally. Love this question because I never really knew I was an anxious person until I was an adult in grad school learning about anxiety. So I became interested in psychology probably in my senior year of high school. I took a Psych 101 class and absolutely loved it. But since I was a little girl, I've always been very intuitive, in tune with people's emotions. I could read people's emotions pretty easily. I've always been very sensitive and empathic. I always felt really bad for the underdog. I remember coming home from school and crying to my mom about things I witnessed that were unkind or people being bullied. My parents really instilled values to stand up for the underdog. So I was always interested in 2 sides, why is the underdog the underdog? And why is the bully the bully? What are people's stories? What influences them to make decisions like that? So then I became really obsessed with hearing people's stories. Everyone has a story behind why they do the things they do. But for me personally, learning about myself as a baby and a toddler, and even until kindergarten, I would diagnose myself now as someone that had selective mutism. My parents said I only talked to them and maybe like a few, like two grandparents and my brother. I was extremely shy. And that's the way they viewed it when I was young, like, oh, she's just very shy. But it was so bad. And I remember being a little girl, like frightened to speak, like it just
Wow.
took over. So now as an adult, if I was treating myself, I would diagnose myself with selective mutism. And then I asked to take a ballet class, and I started dancing when I was about 6 years old. Again, a silent activity. But once I became more comfortable, I think in my body, I started talking. And I remember my dance teacher calling my mom and be like, Justine spoke in class today. And that was my safe space. I made so many friends there. I connected to the art form, and I just fell in love, and I could go on and on about dance. But that opened me up, I think. And once I started talking, I didn't stop. So I think that's my personal story with anxiety. And today I've experienced it at different times in my life cycle. Definitely after having kids, there are moments where my anxiety has gone through the roof. So it kind of shows up from time to time.
That's amazing. I did not expect you to talk about dance. That is very, very cool. So I grew up in the competitive ballroom dancing industry.
Wow, look at that.
So when you said that dance helped you come out of your shell and helped, yeah, that's what dance did for me. It's a family business. My dad's a ballroom dancer.
Get out.
So he had a dance studio when we were younger, and that was our safe space where we could go and we could be, and he never pushed us to do anything we didn't want to do. But yeah, I started dancing when I knew I could dance with boys and do all those things. And it was an incredible outlet for me. It was a way for me to grow into my adulthood. It was a way for me to learn how to, like you said, be comfortable in my body, be comfortable with my voice. But what's so funny is I talk a lot about this on this podcast is actually on my Instagram. I think it still says Confessions of a Ballroom Dancer, because as we know from now Simone Biles and Michael Phelps and some of these high intensity sports, it breeds perfectionists.
100%.
Like ballet, are you kidding me? Like if you have a toe out of place, like you are, you're nixed. And I'm still in that industry today. I just do it, very casually, and on and off, but it is an industry that I am, very familiar with. And so to this day, I see women who are like no hair out of place, perfect spray tan, like all the things, nails, gorgeous, like all of it. And I realized once I won a world title at 21. And I realized once I didn't really want to compete anymore, that wasn't fun for me. I wanted to perform. I wanted to just have fun. But I realized after that, after I had retired from competition, that I was like, oh my gosh, like this just, like you can't have these skills that I used to succeed in this industry in real life, because it will tear you apart. you know? And so I really had to like rebuild myself to become, and that's when the anxiety started happening for me. So that's why it's interesting. Like, I'm so intrigued with this conversation with anxiety, because it's something that so many people who discuss perfectionism don't talk about. And for me, once I realized that I no longer was going to be competing at that high level, because again, just like someone like Simone Biles or Michael Phelps, like you do it, that life is not sustainable for a long period of time. You do it for as long as you can. And some people do it for years, 5-6 years. Some people do it for 10 years, but it's still like, it will not be a lifetime, because you cannot maintain that weight, that, workout routine, that your body will eventually say, okay, you're done with this, and I stopped before my body said it was done, because mentally I was ready to move on to something else. And when I started doing other things in life, trying to build businesses, you know, establishing myself, branding, all of that, I just couldn't, I got so much more anxiety and stress trying to acclimate my systems and habits and disciplines I had learned in competitive sports to real life of what I was doing.
Yes.
So do you see that a lot? Yeah.
We're like spirit animals with each other right now. I can relate
100%.
to everything you're saying. I was like one of those, you know, the show Dance Moms with, what was her name? Abby Lee, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I was one of those kids. You know, I was in a highly competitive dance competition environment. We would travel to dance competitions. I had solos, duos, trios, groups. I loved it. I loved performing. I loved competing. I loved my dance teacher and my friends there. I spent most of my free time at the dance studio. I'd go to school, do homework for 2 hours, spend every day at the dance studio, spend all weekend at the dance studio. I lived and died by that. Wow. It was my passion. But you're right. You're trained to be perfect. You know, the goal was to get first place at every single competition you went to. And then those special awards they give out. And if I did not get first place, I was crushed. But then I had like this fire of like, I'm going to get him next time.
That's it.
You know, it's like never ending. You can't stop. And so that was a huge part of me growing up, and it gave me a lot of discipline. I think dance saved me in a lot of ways for certain things that may have been going on in my life. But with competitive sports, with competitive arts, with anything that people are kind of trained of, like, it's perfection or nothing, right? With dance, gymnastics, any kind of sport, whatever it is that they're doing, you easily burn out your nervous system. So with perfectionism in anything, you burn out your nervous system because we're designed with our fight or flight response.
Right.
I always talk about cave people, you know, as cave women and cave men, we needed to feel anxiety in order to survive. We needed to know that it was dangerous to try and fight a saber-toothed tiger. We're going to flee in that situation. We're going to hide. We're going to avoid, right? That's where avoidance comes in a lot with anxiety. We needed to avoid stressors because that's how we survived. Right. So our nervous system created this whole process with chemicals, with cortisol, adrenaline, all of our stress chemicals that regulates our body in a certain way to help us react to stress, to a trigger, so we could survive. Now with perfectionism, we're constantly in that fight zone. We're fighting for the perfect outcome, right? So as dancers, we could say we were fighting for that first place, but we weren't just fighting at that competition for it. Every time we walked in the dance studio, we're fighting for that first place because that's the end goal. So we have this great drive and determination, but our nervous system is constantly activated of this. We got to fight, right? That fight or flight is constantly kicked in, and then that literally drains us.
Oh yeah. That life is not sustainable. And so like I said, I had to rebuild, you know, and being that my family was in it and everything, like I felt like I had spent so much of my life now doing something that was not going to be serving my future. And that's where the anxiety came in, as I was like, oh my gosh, I just wasted so much time. And I felt like this isn't going to help me. And as much as I love dance, it's not my career, you know, it is what it is. And so I had probably a couple of years of that. And then I started to turn a corner and understand, after I had done a lot of work on myself, you know, been to therapy, done some coaching. I was like, okay, this is not bad. This is actually really good. I came from a very amazing, like all of the things that dance gave me are so much more than, you know, the other qualities like perfectionism and all these things that dance gave me as well. And I learned how to take all of the positive things of what dance did and also use perfectionism as a positive trait to be able to create the Recovering Perfectionist podcast, to be able to work with perfectionists and understand how to help them, because I now had been through that. you know, so I became a survival guide for a lot of people. But I'm just curious again on the anxiety side, because when I was competing, it was very black and white for me. So I was very like male energy, right? It wasn't like I don't even remember in my competitive years even having a period, you know, like I know I did, but like, it was never something like I dwelled on. There was no drama. There was not, I didn't have hormonal imbalances. I mean, I was just a robotic, you know, situation. And so then when I started really like stopping to do all that, and, you know, I started creating this new life, I met someone, I'm now a wife, you know, all of these like female energies started creeping up, and it was something I didn't know how to deal with. And that's where, for me, the anxiety came in. How do you feel? I know you said you deal with a lot of families as well, and I want to get into that, but as far as just anxiety do you see that a lot, where you have some people who were not anxious as kids? They actually had a really great childhood. I didn't have that fight or flight. I was a little shy, but nothing crazy. I was very happy. I excelled in school. I did everything I was told. I was the kind of a rule follower. And then as an adult, all of a sudden, all of these things that I was doing, I realized was just not going to serve me long-term. And I basically felt like everything I had been building was not, like, I had to rebuild, you know? And that's where the anxiety crept in.
You had an identity crisis.
100%. Like,
that's exactly what it is, because
100%.
You had been forming a certain identity for yourself all of these years that you were successful with. So it reinforced that identity development. You were praised for who you were as a dancer and as a student. So much of our relationships, whether it's our family or friends, our academic life, reinforce perfectionism, reinforce these skills that we develop. And once we change our identity, we let go of something, we feel really lost. Even if like what we were doing wasn't healthy, to an extent, we still miss it because it was comfortable and it's what we knew and it's how we functioned. It's so funny. I had a session with a client this week who was saying like, she's made so much progress with her anxiety and she's on medication to help. And she's like, I think so much less now. I'm at such peace. Like, I didn't realize people can go through their life without overthinking, but now I'm kind of uncomfortable with the fact that I'm not thinking so much. Like, we're so used to certain ways of being that it's uncomfortable to let go of other ways, even if they weren't so helpful. So what you went through was this whole identity crisis, and you had to mourn the loss of who you were before, because it did bring you such joy. You literally recreated who you were and what direction you were going to go with this next chapter of your life. And that is so scary. That is unknown territory that you have no idea how to maneuver or navigate. You're really good with part one of Christine's life. You didn't know it was coming with part two. You didn't have the tools, and that brings the unknown. The lack of control triggers so much anxiety for us.
Oh, the lack of control, man. Perfectionists hate that. Yeah, totally. So, a big part of that, like I said, was my dad. You know, my dad is still in that industry. He taught me everything I know about dance, about entrepreneurship, about how, you know, my mom is a 9-to-5. You know, she's a teacher. She has a regular job, essentially. My dad showed us that you could do something crazy and be successful at it, you know, and it was great. But then when I started realizing certain things about my future and the money I wanted to make, the low ceiling in our industry of what you could do and how much money you can make and where you can go with it. And then my now husband, when he was there, we first started dating about 5 years ago, I brought him to all these competitions and I was so excited to show him my life, you know, and we started doing all the things. And after a year, he's like, okay, great. Now what? And I was like, what do you mean now what? this is all I got, and next year we do them again, and we do something different, or you come in, do photography or whatever. And he's like that just was not, he's like, there's got to be more. And I thought, yeah, why am I not doing more? Like, what, there's more than just the dance world. You know what I mean? And so that started an avalanche of like, ooh, wait, now I have this new teammate who's going to be, we already kind of knew like this was it. We were going to be together forever. And that caused a huge rift in my relationship with my dad, because I was so close to him. I was the definition of daddy's girl, and he helped me and I helped him. And it was just a fabulous situation. But then when I started peeling away all the layers of what I had built to discover the new Christine, I was like a raw nerve. I didn't know how to act. I didn't know. I was crying a lot. I never cried. I was like, all of it just came pouring out, and I had no idea how to deal with it. I would wake up in the middle of the night just with crippling depression, anxiety. I mean, it was terrible. And the most terrible part about it was I wasn't talking about it in my professional career. I was very fake it till you make it. Couldn't show my vulnerability. It's crazy to me that I've even come so far to even just have a podcast and be discussing these things on this podcast, because the vulnerability of it just wasn't there for me. And I wouldn't allow myself to not be perfect and not show up as the Christine that everybody knows to be. So talk to me a little bit about, in saying all that, I was just wanting to get into more about the anxiety that you discuss with families. You said you specialize in families.
Yeah.
And that really was a trigger for me, was letting down my dad, realizing that his path was not the path I wanted, realizing that now I was going to be a teammate with my husband and not my dad anymore. Like there were so many things that were delayering that I was like, oh, I was overwhelmed.
Yeah, there's so many parts of this that I want to comment on.
Yeah.
First is it was a loss of identity. Switching careers was a loss of identity for you because of dance, but also because dance connected you to your father, and that was common ground. And now it felt subconsciously like you were giving up the relationship with your father, which wasn't the truth. Like you could still have a relationship with your father without dance, but you never knew what that looked like. So part of you internally was probably like, oh, if I say no to dance, I'm also giving up my dad. And our brain works in interesting ways. And that could have been what was going on psychologically underneath all of it for you. But anxiety, can manifest from family relationships and relationship patterns, boundary systems there. What you were also going through at this time was a level of differentiation, which is a part of everyone's life cycle, hopefully, that everyone can get to. Some people don't differentiate, but you did. It's this ability to be our own independent person with our own new identity as an adult, separate from the family that raised us, but still feel loved and connected to them at the same time. Opposite of that, if you could think of like a failure to launch situation, like the person never leaves home, they're fully dependent on their parents, they live in their basement forever, like that's the opposite. And then you think of like the cutoff person that leaves home and never looks back, and they don't want anything to do with their family of origin. Differentiation is the ability to safely become who you're meant to be, become yourself, and still feel connected with love. And that sounds like that was what was going on for you at that time in your life. You were differentiating. I'm like, and I can't help but think of like a butterfly, like transforming, like a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly.
That's exactly what it felt. And that's so funny because in my logo for my life coaching, there's a butterfly in there. And that's exactly what I feel. Is I felt like I was literally like transforming from a caterpillar to a butterfly, like 100%.
And I don't know if this is true. I'm no scientist, but I read somewhere like the caterpillar has to actually die in order to become the butterfly. And I was like, wow, is that true?
So something along the lines of that, actually, that's so funny. I have a manifestation coach, and she calls it the mush when she's going through like the void, right? And it's just like the low season before she emerges and everything that she wants is manifested. And she discusses the caterpillar butterfly concept of how like it breaks down and decomposes into what like a mush and becomes nothing, which essentially is like what you're saying is like dying or,
Yes.
whatever. And that's what ends up becoming the butterfly. And so like, as we're breaking down and we're becoming, and that was hard for me too, because I was always associating breakdowns or low seasons or feelings of depression with going backwards, right? That's what you would assume is like, I'm clearly not well.
Right.
When I started working with her, she was like, no, this is really good. Like, you need to feel the feelings and you need to sit in that for a minute, and you need to move through that so that you can get to the other side and become the butterfly. But I was not taught that. I was taught that, I was taught the law of attraction very early. So The Secret and all of that stuff, but I was not taught the application of the law of attraction, which essentially is manifestation. And the law of attraction, which the way it was taught to me was be positive. You put out good and you put out positive energy and it'll come back to you. So being negative, being sad, feeling your feelings, being depressed, walking around like a zombie, these are not things that are going to bring you the life that you desire.
Oh, interesting.
That's what I was, you know what I mean? And so when I started working with her, she's like, no, these are all great things. This is like growth moments. This is the time for you to become, really dig deep and rework those limiting beliefs and rewire your brain. And I was like, wait, what does that mean? Like that was not something I was raised with. So can you speak a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So you definitely had this moment where you changed your identity, you went to mush and you formed a new one. But to go back to the family influence, perfectionism can relate to the families that raised us because it might have been a survival skill in our family. We had to be perfect to gain some kind of love, acceptance, or maintain the way the system of the family worked, because a family is a system. Everyone in the system is connected and reacts to each other. When one thing happens with one person, it trickles down through everybody. Everybody is impacted. And there's highs and lows to the system. And sometimes the system falls apart and goes to mush, right? A family has its own identity and the system has to be rebuilt at times. But perfectionism was also maybe a way for people to avoid anxiety or negative emotions in the family for whatever was going on, because our families are the models of how we regulate our emotions, how we cope with emotions, how we deal with relationships in life. It's this blueprint. And sometimes that benefits us and sets us up really nicely. Sometimes that hurts us and teaches us things that probably are unhealthy for us. And as adults, we have to reflect on that and be like, where did I learn this from? Why do I have this habit? Can I unlearn it? Can I create new habits? Like, why is this so normal to me? But I'll get specific, a people pleaser or perfectionist probably had to be that way to maintain some kind of status quo amongst the family system.
It's like a defense mechanism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And everyone has a role in this family. There's the overachiever. There's the good girl. Maybe there's the rebel. Maybe there's like the screw up, like the peacemaker. Everyone has a role in this system to keep it functioning. Right. The perfectionist had a very specific role. Sometimes it was to distract everybody from what was going on in the family that was negative. Maybe mom and dad hated each other and there are full out wars, but the only time they saw their parents smile or feel joy is when the perfectionist showed up in a perfect way, brought home the A, got the highest scores on the report card, was the perfect athlete, the perfect dancer, the perfect whatever. So that the person starts to learn, ooh, I make mom and dad smile when I'm perfect. I'm going to keep this up because we're always seeking
you're
love.
Rewarded for your perfectionism. That's the trick really. And the catalyst for just, this becoming a part of your identity.
Yeah. And we make these rules in our head, like, if you were in a peaceful home, right, but you found some kind of peace by being perfect or overachieving, you would think to yourself like, oh, I need to keep this up. People need me to be this way. I'm going to do exactly what I'm told. I'm going to go above and beyond. This is the way I'm going to survive. But then we apply that to outside the family. And then we end up really like sick, disgusted, overwhelmed, burned out. And usually someone else has to point it out to us to realize like, wait, this isn't a really 100%. Healthy way of being.
Yeah, that's what happened when I started, dating my now husband. It was insane that when he would say that, and he would just see things that I was like, that's normal for me. Like things I would do, my mom's, her mother was a control freak. She's a control freak. I have that controlling tendencies, and I'm very aware when I see it in them, but also like, there are certain ways that I would deal with things or say things or react to things that my husband was like not raised with. And he was like, why do you do that? And I was like, I don't know. Like it started getting really weird. And that's where the anxiety I think crept in, because I was like, oh no, this is not a good thing, apparently, and that's when it was like, yeah, I also, you have to understand, and you may have felt this too, being a dancer, like I couldn't wait to meet my husband. I was like, oh my God, I'm an 11. I'm not a 10. I'm an 11. I couldn't wait. And it wasn't even like an ego thing, because I was very humble, but I was more like, I couldn't wait to show him my life. I was so excited for him to be a part of this roller coaster journey. And like, I'm not this normal person, that I get to do all these fun things. And when he started delayering certain things, and in a very nice way, he was very reflective and very supportive and just trying to understand me better. But I think the hardest part, the anxiety crept in when I was like, I don't understand myself. I'm doing these things because they're a reaction to what I've had around me, or because they were what other people around me were already doing.
Yes. We're so accepting because we don't know any difference.
Yeah.
Until someone holds a mirror up to us and makes us reflect. And then we have that question, why are we doing the things that we do? And it goes back to like these patterns we learned through childhood experiences. Maybe it was your parents, maybe it was events that happened in school. Like, who knows? It's a combination of everything that normalized the way of functioning, until someone points out like, that's not the healthiest way to be,
Right.
Perfectionism is so interesting because it's also at times could be a way to manage our anxiety, because anxiety craves control, like they're opposites, and perfectionism could be a way to try and gain some control. We think like, if I do everything perfectly all the time, I'll be able to have this predictable outcome. I know I will get the grade or the score or the job or the boyfriend. So you don't have to tolerate the discomfort of the unknown. You're like, if I do this perfectly, I can guarantee a certain outcome and I can predict an outcome. But that's so irrational, because you can do everything perfectly and not get that outcome.
Right.
We have experiences as perfectionists being condition that we do get really good outcomes. So it's hard to believe that being perfect won't yield a good outcome. But it's true. You can't always be perfect. Nothing's in our control except like our reactions and our perspective. So perfectionism is a form of control, really.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. Yeah. Let's transition into, maybe some coping mechanisms, or some, I think we've clearly identified the problem. I think it's crazy that we have a similar dance story. I think that was a fun surprise. And another reason to those listening why I don't like to go too deep into my guests that I've never met, like their story, because I want to learn on the episode. That's what makes it really exciting. So that was very cool.
Yes.
But in regards to, for me, for family things, I had to set some really, really thick boundaries at one point. And I talked about this. I did an experiment for the month of September. I didn't talk to either of my parents.
Wow. What was that like?
It was very freeing. It was very freeing. I would say the first like week, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I don't have to answer anyone's calls. I don't have to talk. Like it was, because my family's very, very close and their energies are very powerful. And so I was like, I wasn't strong enough to have a conversation with them and not let that energy affect the rest of my day.
Yeah.
Or to affect my conversations with my husband that night or whatever it was. And I clearly explained to them, hey, listen, I need to do this for me. If I don't do this, I'm going to end up in a not good place. And I need you to respect that. And they were both very, very supportive and respectful.
Wow.
It's a, a rare case. I don't want to say a rare case because I feel like anyone can talk to their parents that way, but I really feel very blessed to have very supportive parents. They've always been incredible, and always wanted the best for my brother and I. And then my birthday is October 1st. So the minute it was up, everyone called me for my birthday and it was great. But I also noticed that first week of October was insanity and anxious driven because all of a sudden everything was coming back to me like a tidal wave. So I had to let the dust settle for a second and find a balance between the two.
Yes.
And what I think it did for me is it gave me permission to say no, to say, you know what, I don't have to call them back right away. Or I don't have to, or I can say, you know what, I don't want you to discuss that with me because that brings up some anxiety, or like it gave me, I wrote myself a permission slip, right? To say, listen, you don't have to have these conversations. You don't have to, if you're not strong enough to handle it. And that month was very eye-opening for me. So, but not everyone can do that. But I have shared that, as an experiment I did, and to encourage people, maybe take a week, maybe take a weekend or something. What would you encourage people to do in regards to managing their anxiety as a perfectionist? Also just anxiety in general, pandemic anxiety. I mean, there's a lot of anxiety going on right now in the world for multiple different reasons. What are some of maybe your best strategies, mechanisms, things that you say that really resonate with your clients?
Totally. And I love that you tried that experiment. That's exactly like I frame things with my patients as, we're going to do an experiment.
Yep.
We're going to try something different, because if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting. So sometimes you need to really switch things up and see how it feels. And that's scary for people. So the biggest step I would say for like an overachiever, perfectionist, people pleaser is to practice with doing experiments in which you are doing less. And while you're doing less, you're learning that you're still safe. You're still okay. The world is not crumbling around you as you think it will. You will still be loved and accepted for doing less, right? So shedding that belief that you have to do everything for everybody all the time, and you owe everybody everything, and you're responsible for everybody and their emotions. Do less of everything in whatever way is unique to you, right? What you did was do less of communication. That's what you needed, and you tried it out.
Yeah.
That'd be the first thing. Second, you already pointed out, is boundary setting, right? But that could look in so many different ways. So we set boundaries with people, right? And that can look like saying no more often. Yeah. Say no when you really don't want to do something. Say no. It's okay. Say no without giving a paragraph as to why you're saying no. All you need to do is say no.
Justification.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But the second part of boundaries with anxiety is boundaries with your time and what you're committing to, and learning different things have different energies. So you could get out your planner and things will line up minute to minute, but the energy of those tasks will feel very different, right? So you might be, and I learned this during the pandemic, during the shutdown for the first time, I did not do virtual therapy, and I saw people in person. That energy is so different than a screen session. So I could bang out 8 in-person sessions back to back, no problem. But doing it on Zoom, I was dying after the 6th. I was like, why am I so drained? So the energy of things you have to learn about and say no and rearrange your time to protect that energy. Just because it looks like it fits on paper doesn't mean it will actually fit into your life and feel good doing it. Just because you could do it does not mean you should do it, right?
Oh, yes.
So really setting boundaries with your time and your energy, setting boundaries with people by saying no. Part of that is practicing assertive communication, right? So people pleasers and perfectionists tend to be the more passive communicator, always saying yes, avoiding conflict, kind of feel like a doormat. There are people that are very aggressive, right? They are, tend to be more conflictual off the bat, cut people out, have low tolerance for differences. Assertiveness is in between, you're not allowing people to walk all over you, but you're not mean, right? So there's this balance of like saying what you need without being insulting about it. And that can take practice and can be very uncomfortable for people. And you could start that slowly. Like maybe you don't start that with your really intimidating boss next week. Maybe you start that with someone you're a little bit more comfortable with.
Sure.
So that would be a big thing. I think you have to really get to know how you talk to yourself. And this is where I do cognitive behavioral therapy. So this is where this comes in treating anxiety. You have to really look at the story you're telling yourself in your head. What is the narrative behind the scenes? And then you have to, one of my biggest tips is to ask yourself if these thoughts are true and or helpful to you. Most of the time we cannot prove them to be true. They're always assumptions based in some kind of worry, and they're never helpful, right? So we only want to be holding on to thoughts that are helpful and true. Sometimes true thoughts suck, right? But we have to deal with those true thoughts.
Right.
That's a different conversation. Most of the storylines in our heads are untrue and unhelpful. Some people have thoughts like, I need to work 18 hours a day, or I won't make enough money, or have a successful career, or I need to write that book, or I won't be relevant in my field. I need to weigh 130 pounds, or I'm a fat piece of shit, or I can't, you know what I mean? Like we have these rules in our head that we don't even realize we're saying to ourselves. And we need to learn how to detach from these rules, redefine what success looks like, unpack all of these thought patterns and really challenge them, because those are the thought patterns that lead us to feel anxious.
Woo, that was powerful. I don't even know where to go after that. Yeah, that is.
It could go on forever.
You could. Yeah. I mean, we talk about, my business partner and I, we just opened up our academy called Freedom Mindset Academy. And we discuss a lot about neutral experiences, how everything is inherently neutral and we give it value. And so it's exactly what you're talking about. That is just so powerful. The minute that we put our own value on it, it's like, you're easily embarrassed, you're easily triggered, everything just becomes, you crave things, you're overachieving, all of that stuff. And so if we just go back to, you're right, what is the story that we're building in our head that is creating this narrative, and how can we rewrite that narrative?
Totally. We do a lot of if then statements, like if I do this, then this outcome will happen, which are so irrational. Like if I tell my boss I can't stay past 5 today because I have that doctor's appointment I really need to go to, he's going to be so angry with me.
And he will fire me something.
He will fire me. I will lose my job. We catastrophize it. And so picking out those if then statements and challenging them is so useful too.
I love that. I could talk to you for hours. You are
same here.
Thank you. You have such an ease and you to how you explain things. Like you make things sound so simple because anxiety is not. Anxiety is something that we create in our head that becomes this thing. Like I always relate it to being on an airplane and being terrified. It just builds and builds and builds and builds, and I've discovered, what a lot of people do, tapping, right? All different types of strategies to help with different parts of my life. And you take the problem or the conversation, and you're able to make it very bite size,
Good.
easy to absorb. So
Appreciate that.
we might have to do a part 2 on this.
I would love it.
Because I definitely could dig a little bit deeper for sure. But I so appreciate you being here, and just again, this is a side of perfectionism that I haven't dug deep into because it's very vulnerable.
Yeah.
But it is also a huge part of it that a lot of people are suffering from and hiding.
Yes. It's so true. It's so true. Well, I'm so happy to talk on this, and I'm so grateful for you to give me this opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So tell us where. I'll put all of your links and stuff in the show notes. So anyone who wants to reach out to Justine, but do tell us where we can find you and
Definitely. So I'm a psychotherapist in private practice. So I see clients that are in the state of New York. I'm licensed to do in-person and virtual in New York State. But because that's so limiting, I've decided I'm actually creating an online course to help people manage anxiety. So it's in the works. It's coming out in early 2022. So if anyone's interested in that, you can head to my website, which is carinocounseling.com. In there, I have a pop-up on perfectionism, and it's signs that your perfectionism can be getting in the way of your happiness. And if you download that guide, you'll be added to my email list, and you'll be notified when the anxiety course comes out. So it's going to be really simple. I love that you said I was simple, because that's my goal.
Yeah.
Simple tricks to manage anxiety on a daily basis. So I could reach people outside of New York. I really have been pulled to expand and teach in this area, because I think we've all been hit with anxiety with this pandemic. And I also have a podcast called Thoughts from the Couch that you can find on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon. And there we talk about so many different things that are common topics on my therapy couch. A lot about healing from dysfunctional family patterns, people-pleasing, perfectionism, anxiety, any type of relationship trouble people might be having. I have different guests come on, and I do some solo episodes so people can get to know me there as well.
That's amazing. I love that. I'm going to have to check out that podcast for sure.
Yes.
I saw that you had that. What a fun name. Thoughts from the Couch. I love that.
Thank you.
Very fun. Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. And I'll look forward to doing a part 2, because we definitely need to dig deeper into this anxiety thing. It's a topic that we need to make sure we get a handle on.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the Recovering Perfectionist Podcast. I'm Christine, and if this episode resonated with you or spoke to you in any way, please feel free to share. I absolutely love hearing from you guys and your thoughts about the topics based on your experiences. And also, if there's anything you want me to talk about, just screenshot this episode and share it on social media with your comments. Your feedback really helps me to curate episodes that best serve you. If you have time, I would greatly appreciate if you could leave a review wherever you're listening to this episode, whether on Apple or Spotify or any other platform. I'm wishing you a blessed week ahead, and remember, perfection doesn't exist. Take messy action. Healthy habits keep us balanced, and you are enough.